Well, thanks everyone for attending the session. My name is Entin. I'm the VP and General Manager for WeWork for US West Canada and a co-working company we acquired called Commondesk. I'm excited for this session, elevating tenant experiences in the office space. And we have an esteemed panel, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we'll get right into it. Robert?
Hi, good morning. My name is Robert Entin. I'm the EVP and Chief Information Officer for Vornado Realty Trust. Vornado is a REIT mostly focused in New York. We do have buildings in Chicago, a building in Chicago and in San Francisco, but we're a Class A office REIT in New York City.
Connor Kidd with Swig Company. We are a 90-year-old family-owned real estate company with office buildings in San Francisco, New York, LA, and Seattle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joel Felcher, HQO. We help owners and operators aggregate the thousands of signals coming from their buildings every day into a real-time tenant health score.
Pete Gottlieb, Hobbs, Brook Real Estate. We are the direct real estate investor on behalf of the property insurance company FM.
Okay, great. Let's get started. So we've seen the industry move quite a bit in the last couple of years from being just an office space or a landlord to spaces that are experience-driven, hospitality-driven, design-driven environments. How have each of you seen basically your industry and your company kind of evolve to that in today's world?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've been focusing a lot on, as you mentioned, is there's this shift from just providing a place to work to this overall experience. And so we're really focused on elevating the overall tenant experience. And we're doing this really with three distinct verticals. So we're first focused on the human layer. And so that's the interaction, the hospitality that not only our staff is, but also our vendors and our security in the buildings. And then the second layer is the digital layer. So that's making sure how we communicate via email, app. We actually use HQO. And then also from digital screens, make sure that's a cohesive experience across our properties and across the platform. So we're communicating in a cohesive way. And then the last is the space itself. So as much as I would like to think the first two could stand on their own, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference if the space isn't nice. So the last is making sure the space is clean, presentable, well-designed, thought out. And so really bringing those three elements together, we think is going to just overall elevate the tenant experience and have a tenant walk away feeling like there's a difference of being in one of our buildings versus another building.
Robert, you want to share about some of the work you've done?
Sure, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you've said there. I look at it, come at it from a slightly different angle. So the amenitization of office space, particularly Class A office space, has been the rave. I think to some extent, maybe it's the confluence of the post-COVID fear that we're going to attract people back to the offices. It's a little bit of a confluence of that, and possibly the WeWork effect, right? So when you look at the old buildings that used to be a place to work, these big unbreakable structures, I always said that WeWork kind of fracked an office building. They very disruptively broke into an office building, found space that was not used effectively, and generated more revenue. I think to some extent, amenitization is very similar. It's, again, a confluence of the post-COVID, right, and the needing to provide a tenant a better experience to come back to the office, and finding the space in the building that was probably not the most valuable space anyway. So if you look at our big development is the Penn District in New York. We spent $2.5 billion in redeveloping the Penn District in New York. Much of it was the train station, Monahan Station, which was a great project, but an awful lot to Penn 1 and Penn 2, which were Class A buildings. They were maybe a little sleepy for Class A buildings, but the Penn District itself didn't command the kind of rents that our Midtown buildings do. With the advent of Hudson Yards to our neighbors to the west, which created, which frankly is not as easy to get to as we're sitting right on top of Penn Station, it opened up an opportunity, and our team had looked at that for years while Hudson Yards was being developed, and knew that so for us the timing was right. We actually started this even pre-COVID, which is interesting. But in spending the amount of money we did on Penn 1 and Penn 2, and really uplifting the buildings, and in both of those, it's really the bottom 2 or 3 floors that we opened up to these huge sitting areas, and where the food is. We've got pickleball, all the amenities we put into the 2 buildings. Completely changed the experience and of course then unlocks a lot more revenue from our rental rates are exceptionally higher, and tenants are coming back. But I think it's all the Class A. It's now becomes table stakes in a Class A building to have that sort of amenitization.
I completely agree, and I will say that I was at Penn 1 and Penn 2 just last week. You guys did a phenomenal job. The roof deck is amazing. I will confess we are a competitor of yours in one of our buildings in New York, and we're also adding a roof deck. So it is an amenities arms race, and I know everyone will obviously choose our building.
Unless they want to be on top of the busiest transportation hub in North America, of course.
What you'll notice is that like the capital investments today is a lot more in terms of bringing back like hotelization in terms of office buildings. And what has happened is, and we've done it at WeWork as well, is we've really made it a welcoming experience where you really want to set the standard for what design looks like to attract tenants or visitors or guests to your place, because those things matter now. And in the past, it didn't really used to be any kind of like table stakes, but today it's almost a priority to have it. Peter, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the entire relationship between tenants and landlords has had to change. It went from 90% economic to what now we look at as really a 50-50 economic and partnership. I think you've seen well-advised tenants think about the capital stack behind the assets and the resilience of that capital, the resilience of the asset itself. My parent company, FM, is largely an engineering firm. We think a lot about the sustainability of the assets in light of natural hazards, cyber attacks, etc. I think tenants are thinking much more about long-term relationship and experience of the asset, not just the experience in day-to-day, but is this a reliable asset for us in the long run, both from our ability to produce whatever it is we produce, but also our ability to attract clients, attract employees, and get people back to work.
I can add one more thing to add. You mentioned hotel and concierge. I think you had mentioned that. One of the things that we did in all of our amenities is we're running them as a business. Vornado owns all the business, whether the hotels, the gyms, et cetera, and the service providers are paid a management fee. This way we control who's in the space, and because if it's a tenant and it's a restaurant and the restaurant's doing well, the restaurant leaves, you have turnover. We really wanted to make this like a hotel, where when you're on our campus using our app, you can get to any amenity, you book anything, and we have a concierge, and we have a hospitality manager and a whole team, and that scales well for Penn 1, Penn 2 because of the amount of square footage there. In other buildings where you don't have that kind of scale, the concierge service is scaled down a bit.
Well, the thing that I'd say we're thinking about it differently. I totally agree. You all have a tremendous scale in Penn 1 and Penn 2. But one of the things that we're viewing differently is working with the existing staff that you have. So the idea that your security guards are no longer security guards. They're lobby ambassadors. And to make sure that they feel that they're making a connection with tenants when they're coming and going and they're presenting differently. I don't know how many of you walked in an office building, and so too many times I feel like the security guards are looking at their phone, they're reading a book, they're listening to a podcast, they're watching a show, and a tenant doesn't walk in and feel like they've made a connection. And so we're focusing on providing specific training and making sure that there is a connection of, there's eye contact at a certain distance and there's a greeting. So it's not only the staffing the amenities, but I think it's working with the existing staff and making sure that there's a hospitality connection on those everyday interactions.
Training the employees to understand they're really working almost in a hotel, and these are guests, and they need to be polite in delivering all the services.
Yeah, I think it could go both ways, and you jumped into the next question in terms of like a lot of services and vendors are an extension of the vendor or the industry, right? Like if you have the security company and the security guards are in the lobby, people will think it's part of the owners. They're not going to know who the vendors are, who's servicing that. So you really want to make sure that that is fully integrated within the experience. And the expectation set is all around. Like we recently did Ritz-Carlton training for all of our staff globally around the whole entire world. So we hired them to come in, train on the hospitality aspect so we can deliver that consistent experience. So it doesn't matter where you go. And we're also even doing it for our vendors as well. And I think that's really, really critical because if we have a cleaning vendor within our space, no one's going to realize that it's WeWork or not WeWork. They're just going to think everything is WeWork. But in terms of standalone amenities, as we move past just the amenity and services, what technologies have you all integrated? And Joel, you might be the perfect one to take this one.
Yeah, I really think it depends on the problem that the technology is trying to solve, right? I think buildings do a really good job of deploying technology. I think where there can be improvement is deploying technology that actually helps the people inside the building. A good example is work orders, right? There's usually 1 or 2 authorized contacts at a tenant that can submit a work order. Imagine we're talking about hospitality. Put that through the hospitality lens. You book a hotel, and imagine the only person that can call or go to the front desk is the person who booked the room. That creates friction. You don't own the customer relationship, and you're not capturing data points. And so that's really how we think about that is how can you collect those data points that exist in very siloed places, create one accurate depiction of health through one pane of glass, and so you can establish those relationships with every customer and get those data points, those signals from everyone and not just a fraction of the people whose names are on the lease.
Connor, I'm going to ask you this one, and anyone else is welcome to follow. What are the ways that you are rethinking your space to better reflect the ways tenants work today, outside of what you shared already?
I think at least one of the biggest things we're seeing in San Francisco is tenants show up and they want the space like now. They're like, okay, can I move in tomorrow? Which obviously is something that WeWork is really good at competing at, but oftentimes they're looking for that direct relationship with the landlord, or maybe they want a more intimate space. In any case, but one of the things that we're doing is we're spec building a tremendous amount of space. So I think we spec built 130,000 feet last year. Average size was probably 2,000 to 3,000 feet. So it's a lot of spaces. And in most cases, we're providing furniture, and even in some cases, we're providing Wi-Fi. So someone literally could move in and start a lease the next day. They don't have to mess with figuring out how to get connected to the internet or how to order furniture or how to design the space. Because one of the things we've seen is that tenants do, they don't want to mess with that. And at least in San Francisco, there's this, maybe you've heard, there's an AI boom. And it is a ton of companies you probably never heard of that range from 2,000 to 7,000 feet. That's the vast majority of the leasing environment. And they just don't have a real estate person or that expertise or capability. So we're spec building a ton of space. Last year, we leased 90% of the space we spec built. So it is working. And we also did a study that space that we had not improved generally was sitting on average over 2 years vacant. And space that once we spec built it, at least in under 2 months. So it has made a tremendous difference. And I would say that that's like a very big change in the tenant market. Now that's very different than what's happening in New York. New York tenants are generally larger and more sophisticated. Not to say that spec building isn't happening in New York. We're actually working on a spec build in New York. But when you're talking about 25 to 100,000 foot tenants, they're generally more sophisticated and more familiar with that commitment. Those are also generally longer leases. Most of these tenants in the West Coast, on the smaller side, they're leasing anywhere from 2 to 4 year terms versus New York, 10-year plus or minus is kind of more average. So the thing that makes it a little bit hard on the landlord side is that math on the NER might be negative, especially if you tend down towards that 2 year mark on a term. However, our experience has been once we spec build it, it leases almost immediately, rinse and repeat, and we don't have to have a capital investment. So that is an investment that is good for a longer duration, which we feel comfortable with as a longer term owner. But it can be harder to make and we've actually encountered this issue with lenders that they're looking at our NERs and they're saying, we're having a difficulty making sense of these deals that you're doing. And we have to say, well, the next time around, we're not going to have to spend the space again. So I say that's kind of a big trend and difference.
I was going to ask you on a second generation space, How many times can you turn over a spec build and, really not put a lot of capital in it?
Well, the spaces we're touching mostly have been as is for about 30 years. So, there's a tremendous amount of new investment that's going into these. We have had multiple cycles now of at least third time we've turned a space. So, but this is at the smaller size. I'd be nervous if you start to tip over, I don't know, 10,000 feet. Then people start to get a little more specialized. When you're under 8,000 feet, there's things that a landlord, I think you can pretty confidently program. There's an office intensive version that's a more small legal firm, professional service firm. There's more tech kind of open. They want a certain amount of open space, a conference room, kitchen. And so that tends to be pretty reusable.
Yeah, see, that's not, in our case, we do very little spec building. We do a little bit of it, but most of our leases are from 30,000 to 300,000 or 400,000 square feet. So the downtime is enormous, right? They sign a lease, they get 15 months of free rent during a build-out period. Their build-outs are very highly customized and they're beautiful. But as you said, the terms are 10 to 20 years. So this is their home for a very long time. But so that we're on the space part of it, we don't, it's kind of business as usual for us, just large tenants with large footprints.
Yeah, I would say that's the same for us in New York. So primarily what I was talking about is, I'll say a little bit San Francisco focused, but generally we see the same thing up and down the West Coast, LA, San Francisco, and Seattle.
Yeah, I've talked to quite a few owners in the last couple months, and a lot of them have been doing spec suites as well, and they've been saying that the success rate of leasability for those have been at a really all-time high, especially because all these AI companies don't know what to do and they don't know their longevity. So it has been working more on the West Coast. But Robert, you were even saying that you outsource the co-working aspect within Penn Station. So not everyone has to do it themselves. There's operators like us and others that are at the conference as well that provide that service. So at Penn Station, Vornado has that option if they want it.
Yeah, so on Penn 1, I think we have 160,000 feet of co-working space. And then we also have a conference center. The co-working space, again, it shows you the value of having a spec-ready place for people to go work. That when we built it, and somebody manages it, we own that business. I think it was probably within 6 to 8 months, 100% occupied. You can't get a seat at the co-working. And our conference center is booked almost all the time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I will say we work in just up the block from you at 1460 Broadway, which has been running, 90-ish% occupancy, even through the downturn. So even during COVID, it was pretty full.
Which I think is a testimony to the 2,000 to 5,000 square foot spec build, because that's showing that it needs there.
And there's a clientele for that, for sure. Pete, I'm going to go to you on this question. Where have you uncovered the biggest gap between the experience you intend to deliver and what tenants actually experience day to day? What actions have been most effective in closing that gap?
I think Robert touched on this. Historically, I think you signed a lease and you looked at the cash flow and you were in good shape for 3, 5, 7 years. And now you need to think about both the day-to-day and the long-term relationship. A tenant's experience, you could be physical, could be, hey, this is the right location, this is the right floor plate, this is the right fit out for a tenant. But the experience is actually from the moment they drive into your building. Is it landscaped? Is it signed well? Is it clean? Is the garage well lit? Do the tenants feel safe? Are they walking into past a security desk where they feel like they're being welcomed? But it could be a light bulb. If you're the CEO of a company and you have a light bulb out and as you mentioned, is a process to get that repaired. That can sort of factor into your long-term view of your space. And so what we think about is really improving those day-to-day touch points, either through technology or just that hospitality focus. It's much more frequent check-ins between our asset manager and points of contact at the individual buildings. It's more physical presence. We're vertically integrated, so we have our property managers roaming quite often. Part of their day-to-day is not only making sure vendors are showing up and work's getting done and the bills are being paid, but it's really that experience, that relationship-driven experience between landlord and tenant, and that partnership that we're focused in on going forward. So again, I think from an investment perspective, you think about duration of cash flow, rents, mark to market, et cetera. But really now it's much more of the day-to-day and things as small as water working, light bulbs, snow plows, all that experience. That's really what we're honed in on now.
That's spot on. And I mean, thank you for the softball, right? I mean, this is exactly what we hone in on. This is our wheelhouse every day, right? Is we wholeheartedly believe that the work starts when the lease gets signed. That's not when it stops. And so, the three layers that we try and think about from a, access control, utilization perspective, it's so critical. It's such a key data point just to see who's coming and going. It's equally as important to see who's inviting guests, who's interviewing a lot of people. That's a very good indicator of a healthy space that people are proud to bring people to. The flip side of that is, what if those badge-ins decline? What if they are trailing off over time? You look at it over 6, 12, 18 months, that could be a great leading indicator that maybe they're not that happy and you should get in front of them. The second layer is, space satisfaction. Are they booking the amenities, right? All the stuff that we've been talking about. We are in Pen 1 as well. We love it. We love the perch. We love the landing. We love our hamburger budget as well. But if you think about that satisfaction layer, it's what are people booking? What are they not booking? Do you have a cost center that maybe you could turn into a revenue center? Do you have a pickleball court and no one plays pickleball in the office? Maybe you could do something differently with that. And then the last piece is satisfaction, right? Are your tenants hosting events? Are people RSVPing to the events? Do you have a way to communicate with all of these people with each their own individual relationship? And that's the stuff that can create that score so that you can look down the line 2 years into a 5-year lease and say, they submitted 50 work orders in the last month. Maybe it's a good thing because they trust you to get their stuff fixed and they're very engaged, versus the tenant who's not submitting any work orders. And maybe it's because they don't care, they're not engaged, and they have one foot out the door. So being able to hone in on that stuff is just super critical.
We think about friction not only in the workspace, but I have a number of suburban campuses. We think about reducing friction outside of the workspace. So some of our events are, in New England, we have ski tuning, or we have mobile car washing, or massages or eye check-ins, things like that. So it's really taking that relationship and that friction not only in the workspace, but trying to remove friction for the employees of these tenants beyond their day-to-day in the office.
When you talk about the large number of amenities, you get back to the technology issue of how do you connect all of it. When the tenant experience apps first came out as a silo in our space 7, 8 years ago, our view was, it's kind of nice and it's pretty, but they know where to order food from. And if you're not badging in to get into a building, if you don't have turnstiles, is it really going to blossom as a silo in the prop tech industry? And I think maybe, the early founders like you guys and some of the others, really the high amenitization of our buildings has created the need. Your tenant has to have a single pane of glass where they can reserve the pickleball court, they can get their car from the parking garage, they can order food, they can book the conference center, et cetera. And that requires a couple things. One is it requires the app that brings all of those providers together in one place. Sometimes the app itself controls it, sometimes it integrates with the provider's app, and it also requires a converged network within the building, which, for that predated the amenitization of the buildings because just the building operations got more and more complex, and you couldn't have 5 siloed networks within a building. So I think the confluence of a converged network within the building, all the amenities that need to communicate over that layer, is a really ripe time for certainly the Class A buildings with a lot of amenities where you really do need something to pull it all together in terms of an experience app.
And what we're seeing as well, there's a lot of portfolios, as you know, where there's tons of buildings across a wide space, and maybe one of those assets is highly amenitized, but the rest aren't. And so people are starting to, leverage one booking system, one source of truth for that whole portfolio. And so you might have, buildings spread across a city or a region, but you could still connect the dots and get that data on them.
I'm curious if you'll have a sense of when you have high engagement on the app and when you don't. Is it building specific? Is it amenity specific? Is it tenant specific? I'm sort of curious as to, and this is something we kind of ask ourselves of how do we make sure we're driving engagement, and we look at our engagement numbers. And I'm sort of curious if you have a thought of we've looked at all the data and here are the things that matter.
That's a phenomenal question. And what I would say is it's that full tenant health picture, right? Like it's super helpful in a vacuum to see, oh, this conference room has been highly booked over the last week, but it's more impactful when you can derive an actionable insight and see a good example, like a work order example, right? It's nice to see that the HVAC on floor 7 needs some service. It's way more helpful for a building to say, 200 people, here are the names of those 200 people have been negatively impacted their experience because of, the temperature is too hot or too cold. Let's deploy credits to this specific tenant so that they could leverage those in the restaurant, at the pickleball court, at something else. And so you're using that data to drive action to head off potential churn down the line. So it's that snapshot of my whole portfolio, all of my tenants, who's at risk, who's super healthy, who can I keep super healthy, and who might be at risk. Should I do something specific with?
How have some of you used all the data that you're collecting to make some of those investment decisions? Connor, have you leveraged the data and looked at it pretty substantially?
I would say that we have yet to derive a meaningful takeaway from the data and say we need to do X, Y, and Z. I would say that we do have an ESG report that has yielded a whole lot of data that's not just tenant specific, it's more across the whole portfolio. And that has actually been an interesting tool in itself of providing this data out to tenants. And this is sort of coming back to the tenant side of things, which is tenants are hungry for that. And they really want to know, and it's actually come out where lenders now want to know. We started having lender questions about what is your status and focus on ESG. And so just putting out our ESG report has had, I would say, some somewhat unintended consequences. One, we obviously can point to it for lenders. Tenants, we've actually had tenants come to our buildings because we have the report. We've also had employees that have joined our team and joined the company because they say, hey, you guys seem to value diversity, and I see that the diverse workforce, I want to be a part of that. So that's been a couple of things where putting out data has been impactful, but not as much on, say, the tenant specific side, other than a tenant saying, I know you guys are committed to ESG and I want to be a part of that.
Okay. Last question. 5 years from now, what investment or service offered do you think you'll be glad you made for your tenants and your organization? Robert, do you want to start, and then we'll just go down the line?
Sure. I mean, I don't think it's going to take 5 years. I think we're seeing it real time, right? You're talking about usage and measuring tenant satisfaction and data. We're getting there with data, right? We're doing a lot in occupancy calculations every day. Who's coming? How many desks are they filling? And that sort of thing. We're not getting that through the app. We're getting that through our turnstile systems and such. But and I'm not sure. Probably you're the same with your leases now. One of the big parts of our leases, on the particularly long-term leases, a whole lease incentive, tenant amenity credits, right? They sign. It's really almost like part of the TI or part of the leasing committee. It's part of that calculation. So by virtue of the fact that we're giving them these tenant amenity credits, X amount of money in the restaurant, certain amount of parking, you've got use of conference, you can use the perch X number of times, et cetera. Because of that, we do get that usage data, right? As part of our lease abstracting system, obviously, all those are obligations under the lease. We understand those obligations, and the usage of those obligations are tracked. So one of the reports that we look at very frequently is who's using their credits and where are they using those credits. But so therefore, I don't think it's a 5-year thing. I think it's clear that to get the high rents you want and get people into the buildings you want, you have to do what all of us are basically doing.
Maybe I'll add a few things. So we're actually looking to expand the amount of data we're getting from tenants because I feel like we needed more actual tenant engagement data. So we launched a survey that we're going to be doing periodically to really measure tenant satisfaction. So we didn't do the third-party Kingsley or anything like that, but we're doing an internal, relatively simple 10 questions. And then our goal is to measure that over time. And so I hope to be able to look back and say, okay, at this point in time, we transitioned to the lobby ambassador program, and we saw tenants' satisfaction increase. Or tenants were asking for this amenity in Q3 of 27, and we were able to implement it, and tenant satisfaction went up. So our goal is to start measuring some of those things, which I would say we haven't been great about. The other big investment I think that's really going to pay dividends, and I've kind of already touched on this, so this is maybe not surprising, but that investment in the tenant space, the tremendous amount of spec building space, I think is going to continue to benefit us for a long time. one of the biggest buildings we're doing this in is a building that we acquired our interest in the 1950s. So very long time hold, approaching 70 years on a hold. And these are spaces that we haven't touched in, as I was saying earlier, 30 years. And so I think the investments that we're making now, I don't know if they'll go 30 years, but I hope that it is for many years to go. So I feel pretty good about that. And then just connecting with the team members and making sure that we're overall focused on this goal of elevating the tenant experience. I think that's going to really pay dividends as we look down the road.
Yeah, I mean, there's a crazy stat that Tom Sinelli does not agree with, but it's less than 5% of employees know who their landlord is. And that's because those relationships aren't being captured. They're not being owned at the top. And I think that's really the big next step. And I think that starts, talking about capturing data. We have a survey. I don't know if people are familiar with the Leaseman Index, but that's part of our portfolio. And so being able to start that flywheel, capturing what people want, being able to deploy credits, I think both for the tenants, but also the people that work in the building, like we were talking about as well, creating that sense of community. So the person who is at the front desk greeting people isn't on their phone. They're not ducking behind the desk eating, right? They're trying to earn shout outs, earn credits that they can, get by virtue of being a great employee, building that community that can then be redeemed for other things within the building, experiences, things like that. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity here to really create that community within office, especially because that train has left the station. 98% of companies are in some way remote now, whether it's 1 day or 3 days. And so having that community those days that people are in is what's going to drive this industry forward, I think.
By the way, I agree with Tom in disagreeing with you because the name is plastered all over the building. They know who the landlord is.
I will say we did. We recently got a proposal from a tenant, and it's very early stages. Who knows what happens? But one of the reasons they were interested in us because there's a fair amount of office distress in San Francisco. A number of landlords that are either underwater or maybe the building's not worth the debt. And so one of the things the tenant was looking for was a stable landlord and knowing that the landlord would be around, and obviously being able to state that we've owned the building for 70 years is a pretty long-term view that we can provide. Sorry.
I'll give a few examples. One on the experience side, we spend a lot of time working with our food service provider. It's one of the longer and more frequent touch points between tenants and landlord, and the particular amenity is the food. So we curate the menu on a weekly basis. We have self-checkout with sort of an AI-driven, you place your items on a pad, very quickly identifies what that pad is, a seamless checkout experience. We found that honing in on that has helped us on rollover as tenants have looked at other assets and they have a more sort of hands-off food service experience. That has actually driven some tenants to want to stay in some of our assets. But then back to the resilience thing, resilience side of things that HBRE and FM, our parent company, focusing on. I'd say, from a business interruption standpoint, we think about that quite a bit, and a couple small, but orders of magnitude driven things we think about a lot. We have significant flood protection, especially in New England. We can get 2 feet of snow on a Monday and have it be 70 degrees 3 days later. We have flood zones. We have flood walls that we put up in emergencies. We had a building in suburban Providence, Rhode Island. We got about 4 inches of rain in about 2 hours. We were one of the only assets in the building in the market that was able to stay operational. Our tenants were happy. They had an investor meeting happening during that flood. The investor meeting kept going. The building was open the next day. The rest of the market was down and underwater, literally for about a week. And then the cost to repair that flood damage was significant. Secondly, we have sprinklers throughout our assets. That's important from again, business continuity. If God forbid something happens, we have sprinkler systems that's important to FM throughout their policyholders, especially our directly owned assets. And then finally, backup generators, even on some of our Class B assets. If you have a utility company that clips the wrong wire and you have an entire neighborhood go down, that backup generator clicks on right away, and you have the one building that's lit in an entire campus. It's a good marker for not only your existing tenants, but tenants in the market who might be looking at your building.
For those the food service you touched on at the beginning, are those suburban buildings, suburban assets? It's interesting that food has come up in a very urban environment, obviously Penn 1, Penn 2, and a suburban environment, and in two very somewhat similar approaches, it sounds like, which is...
If it's on-prem, like I never thought people needed an app, a tenant experience app to order food, because we all have, whether it's Ritual or Uber Eats or, any of them. But if it's in the building and it's part of the landlord's offering, I mean, I think that makes the difference. But one other comment on the people who are the employees of the tenant. They know who the landlord is, but most of them aren't as engaged daily as perhaps some would like, because not a very small percentage of the employees who work at a tenant do have the authorization to do work orders or make reservations in conference centers or use co-working space, et cetera. So, I think one of the challenges that we all probably face is that while we have investments in a tenant experience app and it's done very well, it's not going to touch all the employees of the tenant for sure.
That's a good point. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it goes back to what we were talking about before, right? Like adoption's never going to be at 100%, but what are those important metrics for you? Is it the utilization? Is it the satisfaction? You're not going to check every box all the time, but if you can really hone in on the food and drink, right? Like an office experience culture used to be defined by what? A ping pong table and a couple beers on tap. Now it's, you want to have a nice chair, reliable internet, and the flexibility to move around, right? And so being able to just hone in on what those people actually want by virtue of asking them, again, starting that flywheel by saying, what is it that you want to get out of a work day when you go home, you feel good? Honing in on that is where I think it all comes together.
We have a couple more minutes, so if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, feel free. Go for it.
Kyrie Tan with the Swig company. So I have a couple of questions. First, this is for anyone to answer, but if you could talk a little bit about the importance or what's the priority of having cross-property amenity sharing, and do you feel that would be impactful to have across your portfolio, and what maybe are the reasons for that? And then on the technology side, for you, Joel, with regard to the data that you mentioned, which is all available within the app dashboard, obviously we have your app, so we know. So we can go in and see all those metrics, but for the property managers who maybe are not as going into those dashboards frequently, so what's the cadence do you recommend in going in and looking at that data, number one? Or number two, are you deploying AI to get some insights to kind of automate that process and tell us, like, on a monthly basis, hey, this is happening, you may want to pay attention to this?
It's the latter. It's layering in the AI aspects so that you can go into the platform, ask a question, which tenant utilized this amenity the most, who is underutilizing this amenity the most, which conference room is being booked the most, and then being able to deploy credits or offer something or email whomever might be involved immediately. So the AI aspect that you mentioned, that's the next big wave for us. And then you to answer your first question, I mean, I would encourage, there's a group in Amsterdam called The Collection. They are spread out all throughout the city. Each building has an e-bike share. There's gyms in several. There's a penthouse apartment. There's a boat you can rent for the canal for they have a ton of different amenities. It's all connected through the platform. They call it the backbone of their platform because someone could be across the river and see a conference room open or an e-bike available and be able to go there, work out, finish their day, take the e-bike back over. So what you're talking about in terms of the amenity sharing, we're seeing everywhere, right? Instead of people putting a $300 million amenity center across 5 buildings, they're doing $500 million in one and making it available for everyone.
We're doing cross-building sharing with all of our amenities. But again, we're a lot in Manhattan. So we look at Manhattan as a campus to a large extent.
We have a number of suburban properties, and we structure it as a campus. One's called the Mainspring. It's 11 buildings. We have different amenities in different buildings. They all are under the Mainspring umbrella, the same technology stack. And what we've also found in that campus setting, it allows for flexibility within that setting. So we have the 3,000 tenants, 3,000 square foot tenants that may have a 5-year lease. They need 12,000 square feet. They've grown. We can structure that within that campus. They have a feel for it. They're not moving from one building. The disruption, they kind of feel like it's a less disruptive issue to grow.
Yeah, we're at time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panelists. This was a very thought-provoking conversation, and thanks for attending the panel.